you? Yeah. Hey,
Hi,
Frodo.
guys.
Fred, how are you?
Yeah, normal. So that's a good thing.
Sorry to hear your latest episode.
Yeah, it's a bit frightening.
Yeah.
At the time it was just weird, but thinking about it later, it's like my son is 5.5, as you know, and we have a great relationship. I really wouldn't want him to grow up with a dad who cannot talk or write or communicate. That would be a bad upbringing.
So what happened, Frodo?
I had a stroke a week ago.
Oh, geez.
So I woke up very eager because I'd solved something in author's map view, very excited, did some work early in the morning, then went up and tried to tell my wife that the light in the kitchen I turned on that morning, it wasn't on all night. And the words came out in very random order. I had no control over them. It only lasted about 5-10 minutes. But anyway, she called an ambulance, they did the test, went to the hospital, did some more tests, and it was verified. And then I went back for more tests in a few days. So now I'm on statins and another drug. I have no idea what it is, but Emily feeds it to me, so that's good. And I've been told not to stress. So you have to be nice to me, which is a good fringe benefit.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, there we go. The problem is once you've had one stroke, you have a 40% chance of having a stroke roughly within a year. So that's not what I want.
Well, not to get into your business, but if you're interested, I'd be happy to send you a bunch of stuff I have on the benefits of a whole food plant-based diet for lowering blood pressure and protecting heart. And if you're open to that idea, I think you'd be
It's 4 p.m.
worth looking into.
Our diet is very vegetable based. So that was a surprise. It's probably my sleep. I have severe sleep apnea.
Yeah.
That's a thing. But, I very often I take a nap during the day. It really, really helps.
Yeah.
And then I'm back on my feet roaring. So yeah, thank you for your concern, guys. But yes.
Well, I can say sleep apnea machines sure make a difference. I've used one for about 2.5 years now. And the ResMed is the one to get. ResMed.
Okay.
It's a Netherlands-based company. And the other and to prevent strokes, I take blood thinner.
Yeah. Yeah, I do take statins and I take aspirin and all of that good stuff. Excuse me, I got a cough from drinking.
Yeah.
So there's another
Hi, Mark.
Hey, my brother-in-law had done for his sleep apnea. They actually insert something into your throat or whatever, and then you don't need the machine. It takes care of it. There's a little bit of a month to let it heal up, and then you're good to go. That's another approach, and he's very happy with the procedure he had. It's relatively new, but evidently effective. Yeah.
Sounds bizarre.
Yeah. Well, this is we've got brain inserts, so breathing implants isn't a bad thing. Isn't so strange either.
Yeah, fair enough.
The rough data are that every year something like 2% of your muscles get more flabby.
Yeah, right.
Some data sort of like that, and that includes the top of your mouth, the back of your throat.
Oh, really?
Whatever.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, some of us exercise the mouth muscles more than others. So,
I never thought of that one, David. That's good.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by some people like that.
Yeah.
I also finally got a response from my advisors on whether or not they think I can do the correction. So, Mark, I may be coming down your neck of the woods on Friday, actually, to have a meeting with Dave. So that would be Dave Millard. Would be interesting. We probably should wait till 5 past to see who will file in. And
sure,
you start, David. Is that cool?
Yeah. And I have a these are wonderful little timers. You just set it and bing, you get a little bell goes off. So I'm setting this for 30 minutes and I will be done at that point and then hopefully see what people think because basically the purpose here is to lay out really a response, Bob, to your email about, well, how could we go forward and address the very cogent questions that you raised about the last 10 years of this project and where it goes from here. So,
Yeah,
By the
very good.
way, one of our sort of regulars, Jim Strayhorn, notified me, and he fell off a ladder a few days ago. So he may or may not be here today. I don't know. He's
yeah, no,
recovered.
his essay was very relevant that he sent me through your recommendation. I actually have that in the presentation because there's
Oh.
kind of this tension, right, between let's just get to the point and let's do the deep reading to get into, you know, and it's kind of where's the sweet spot in between. So, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, it's awful. I hope he's okay.
He mostly broken some broken ribs, and he did bang his head. So and so he's a little. When I talked to him the other day, he was still a little slow and not quite as coherent as he usually is.
Right. Talking of being slow, I'm also slow work-wise these days, so I'm a bit behind on the transcript from our previous meeting, but that's the way it is. Fabienne, now that we have a few minutes before we start and you are here, we've been text chatting a little bit about our demo day or something, but also are we considering maybe trying to host the next Future of Text at the Mondaneum? I can't spell it, so that's why I have to speak it. Is Fabienne here or is he hiding? Maybe he's hiding.
He's got his mute. He's got a mute on.
Yeah, he's probably on his walking thing. Chris and Peter, good to see you. Chris, how are you?
Pretty good. I just got my sound working. So
You got your what working?
what's it? So what's it?
Sound, he said. Yeah.
Sound. Oh, okay. Yeah, very good. And Peter, you're okay? Okay, great. So the hidden ones are really hidden.
Yeah, yeah.
Fair enough.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, one thing for Fabian and one thing for Mark, which is relevant to this community. Because so Mark, for my own PhD, I'm going to have to do some more literature review, and obviously I'm going to be reading your thesis again because you basically done it, and obviously I will be crediting, citing, and copying you. But I was just wondering, because of your knowledge of historical systems, do you maybe want to do a presentation in the community one of these weeks or months on an interesting history of hypertext, maybe?
I could do. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting having been around this boy several times recently. I mean, to a certain extent, it's interesting in historical terms, but there isn't in a sense an awful lot left. The web borged most things. The vibrant bits really are spatial hypertext and sort of games narrative are probably what's left. But we were talking about this, funnily enough, just in our lab group this morning. But yes, yeah. If
okay, we'll talk about that offline.
If I need to flatten my mouth a bit more.
Yeah, you need to exercise your mouth. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't respond right away before, Frode. I was refilling my orange juice and honey and tea. I'm on the tail end of the flu. I'm almost out of it, so hopefully I'll be my old me in a day or two now.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Oh, in other news, I'm getting within striking distance of being demoable on my literate programming project. So maybe in 2 weeks, I'll have something that'll be fit enough to show the group.
Yeah, that's excellent, Peter. That would be very good. So Fabian, we've been, what I was saying earlier, we've been text chatting a bit about the demo day and the next FOT. Maybe we can try a Mondaneum. Maybe we should put some dates in the next couple of weeks because some people are extremely busy. For instance, Vint, if he's going to co-host again, he needs at least 6 months warning for anything.
That's busy.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Most Future of Text, I just have to take whatever month he's free. And we have
But,
there again.
That works. The thing is, it's basically up to us. So it means we decide on a date, a topic, how many people come, etc. And every time we have something slightly clearer, it makes for everybody who might participate easier to welcome us, help us, all that.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. So, and I see we're way over, David. Don't worry, we will have a solid 30 minutes for your presentation and further dialogue. Yeah, we should probably have a meeting next Monday. I'm unfortunately on the road. I'm actually going to Paris for Valentine's randomly because I have school today. So that's
Nice.
fringe benefit of having a stroke. Suddenly my wife wants to do things. So it's very nice. But yeah, let's consider something and put something in the book. Probably we'll try to do 2 days like we did last year, because 2 days allows us to stretch a bit more, doesn't it? So maybe one day is towards education, which is the theme of the book. Maybe the other day is general VR. But anyway, okay, I think the core people are here.
Yeah.
Shall
I share my screen?
Yeah, okay. Fabian, I'll see you next week. We'll figure something out. Yes, okay. So it's 9 past, and very happy to introduce David, who you all know, which is why you're here. And he's going to do half an hour presentation, and then after that will be us chit-chatting. And what a beautiful picture you start with.
Yeah, yes, indeed. So I'm setting my little clock here for 30 minutes and definitely won't go over it then. So back in 2020, Rhoda contacted me to submit an essay, 1,000-word essay, to the first volume of the Future of Text, and that's how I first got involved with this group and this project. And a few weeks ago, Bob Horn sent out an email sort of right after the publication of the third volume. And he raised 4 questions, which I've kind of reduced the words a little bit here. But basically, he was saying, you know, we've been at this for 10 years. We've got hundreds of essays from many different perspectives. How do we kind of bring this all together? What are the problems facing the future of text? And what are some of the good ideas that have emerged from this project? How might we apply those ideas to go from the 3-volume set to something else? And then sort of the overarching question where as you know, matter stores energy, text stores ideas and thinking. So what is the future of thought going to look like based on all of these perspectives? And so I just have to, before I start getting into an approach to addressing Bob's questions based on some technology that I've been working on for over a decade, and also a project that I did using that technology with the first volume of the Future of Text. We can look back on Vannevar Bush's Memex and his anticipation of the internet and his idea of a trail, which is, you know, readers collecting fragments of text or blocks of information, to use Bob's terminology, through a collection of documents. And he saw this as representing the mind at work. And so now flash forward, and here we are in 2023. And before I jump into the demonstration part of the presentation, shortly after Bob sent out his email and I volunteered to do this presentation, he asked Jim Strayhorn to send me his essay from volume 3. And Jim is pointing to the fact that aside from reading fiction, we have an overwhelming amount of articles, research papers, and so forth. And wouldn't it be nice if when you picked up a journal article, you could get right to the crux of it without having to go through so much sort of superfluous text. And in this essay, he's asking for better formatting and to sort of make it very easy for the reader to get to the main ideas. And then on the other hand, you have people like Marianne Wolf, who I noticed also submitted an essay, talking about the fact that online reading suppresses deep reading and slow reading, and we really are losing that ability to concentrate. So these seem like two ends of a dimension. And what I'm going to show you is an approach that maybe balances those tensions. So the beginning of the product that is called Highlighter goes back to 1992 when I was at the end of my graduate student career at Florida State University in the learning sciences. And I was finishing up my final courses and thinking about, what am I going to do my dissertation on? So I decided I'll try and write a paper for publication, and that maybe could serve as a jumping off point for a dissertation. So I read about 80 or 90 articles, did what I normally did when writing papers, which is I highlighted the papers, the key parts, created an outline, and then wrote the paper. And I had a 30-page paper, and it was terrible. And I was practically in tears thinking, I've been in graduate school for, 3 years now, I earned a master's, I'm on my way to a PhD, and I can't write a paper for publication. So the idea for Highlighter emerged out of desperation. And what I did was I just sat down at my Apple II computer and typed everything that I had highlighted from the 80 or 90 articles into a single document, a linear document. Each snippet or fragment had a code number for the article that it came from and a page number. And I took that document, it was about 88 pages, and the total number of journal pages was something over 1,000, but I boiled it down to about 88. And I cut those pieces, those fragments up into pieces of paper, put them in a paper bag, shook the bag up, and laid them out on the floor in columns. And within each column, I tried to get a kind of logical flow. And in arranging the columns left to right, I tried to get a kind of global coherence, like chapters in a book. I did 3 iterations of taping the pieces back together, reviewing them, asking myself, what do I understand? What don't I understand? What associations do I see that aren't obvious? And what is the pattern emerging? And on the 3rd iteration, I had an aha moment. I wrote the paper, submitted it to the AECT, which is the professional organization, and I won something called the Young Scholar Award. And the paper, which was published in 1993, has been cited almost 1,000 times since, which is kind of crazy for a graduate student's paper. So what was going on here? And I think by just spending a minute on sort of my reverse engineering, how did I end up going from desperation to something that was a prize-winning paper? So a basic idea in the learning sciences is this generative effect. So if you're taking notes during a lecture or writing in the margin, you're going to learn better if you write something that is unique and creative or and connected to your current knowledge rather than simply summarizing. So what happened on the floor here is that I activated my story thinking, the part of my the process that my brain is most comfortable in, which the mind evolved telling stories. And in a way, by trying to arrange these pieces into a narrative-like structure and activating story thinking, I had really tapped into a very powerful generative effect. And another aspect of the process was that it induced me into a flow state, that there was something about this process that made me lose myself in the moment and brought out a higher performance. And what happens is you start off not knowing very much about the topic. So of course you're not going to have a big insight because you have to know something first. And so this process helped to develop what's called crystallized intelligence. That is taking new information on a topic and linking it to what you already know so it becomes more actionable. And then what I experienced was kind of a phase change where one day I, maybe on the third round going through the pieces and arranging them, all of a sudden everything is making sense. And so now my fluid intelligence can kick in, which is that aspect of mind where you see associations and you combine information to come up with new ideas. And so in a sense, the process prepares the mind for serendipity and insight. So let's move ahead. 20 years later, I started a company, software company, with former president of Florida State, Dale Lick, to basically take the process that I had engaged in back in '92 and reify it as software. So a few terms before I show you how this thing works. So the name of the product, Highlighter, comes from a combination of hypertext plus highlighting. And Highlighter is a multi-source sense-making platform, and it can also be seen as an external memory technology. A highlight is something like an annotation. And essentially, it's a selected fragment of text or a block of information with meta content, a comment, an illustration, and also an ID number that links back to the fragment in its source. So you always maintain context. No matter where you move a highlight in the system, it retains its link back to its context. And then sort of the really innovative part of the system is the high trail, which again is a highlight trail or a trail of highlights. And basically, this is a preferred sequence of blocks of information and meta content from multiple documents arranged in a preferred order that has a narrative-like structure or storyline. A marker is a term I borrowed from semiotics. So a marker is a heading or a note that you insert into the high trail to facilitate or improve the coherence or logical organization. And then also you can insert external highlights, in other words, fragments from documents that you don't necessarily have inside the highlighter application, or you may not have access to the whole document. The assembler is the person who puts the document, the high trail together, constructs the high trail. It can be a person, a group, or a machine. And then three concepts that are critical. Global coherence is the degree to which the headings that you insert, which are like chapters in a book, reflect the full breadth of the topic that you're interested in and have a logical and meaningful order. The local coherence of the high trail is the degree to which highlights that are next to each other have a degree of logic and meaningful order. And then as you're creating the high trail and reviewing it, you're engaged in coherence monitoring. So you're assessing your high trail for global coherence. How complete is it? How logical is the ordering of the major categories? Local coherence. How smooth are the transitions from one highlight to the next? And then finally, how relevant and clear are the comments? So prior to, in the early days of Highlighter, we had built it was basically a fancy online annotation system. But about 4 or 5 years ago, we implemented the high trail. And so for the last 4 years, I have been experimenting with the high trail while our developers have been building a new version of Highlighter. That new version, in particular, has plasticity and scalability, because one of the things I discovered is that user experience design is critical to making a product that is going to get the job done. We have lists and lists of features that would make it easier and more fun and joyful to engage in this kind of multi-source sense making. So the first project I did was on the museum industry, and it generated some really original ideas, I think. And the need for the museum industry to have a online program management provider. Like, how do you, museums are getting into doing a lot of education, but they're not educational experts. And then in 2018, I used Highlighter to write a paper on using Highlighter for transdisciplinary research, so a social machine for transdisciplinary research. And that was published in Information Science and has been downloaded quite a few times since. Now, the museum study was, I ended up with maybe 25 sources and only about 100 highlights. The social machine project, I had about 60 or 70 articles, and I had maybe 200 highlights, fragments and comments in the right margin of the Highlighter application, which I'll show you in a second. And so when I saw the future of text, it has something like 170 essays plus a foreword and an introduction, I thought, oh, this would be a great exercise to see how to use Highlighter at a bigger scale than what I had done previously. And in fact, I ended up with about 600 highlights. So this is the UI for the prototype. I'll show you the new version, which is under development right now. And so I'll just spend a minute on this page to get everybody up to speed on the product itself. So I can import up to 100 megabytes at a time. I can import a single document that's 100 megabytes, and it'll work in the new version in the same way as a 10-page document. So I imported The Future of Text, Volume 1, and I read through the essays, and I added highlights by simply capturing a section of text, adding a comment, and adding a link if I wanted to something external, etc. And I ended up with about 600 highlights. Now, what I'm showing you here with this blue and green is Highlighter has provisions for collaborative annotation. So I'm the logged in user. So everything in yellow, those are things that I highlighted and commented on. Anything in blue, other people highlighted on, but I didn't. And anything in green is overlap. I highlighted and somebody else highlighted, or two people replied. I replied to something that somebody put up, or vice versa. So yellow is mine, blue is not mine, green is ours. This simple mechanism allows 100 people or more to have threaded discussions tied to specific sections of a document without creating a mess. And so you see when you click on a highlighted fragment, it emphasizes the comment that went with it. As an aside, when I created this thing, I put a link to each author's profile. And so in the new version of Highlighter, there will be provisions. I had to do this manually, be the provisions for that kind of thing. So I've got these 600 highlights. I go to this drop-down menu here, and it says copy to the high trail. So all of the everything I highlighted ends up over here in this right margin. And you can think of this screen as presenting two applications. One is an online collaborative annotation system, which is the document and the left margin. And then this black line separates the high trail, which is where you can collect pieces of information from multiple documents. So what I did was I went through the high trail and I generated tags for each highlight. And I basically on the fly was creating a tag set. And once I had everything tagged, I could go to this drop-down menu, which is for the high trail, and it allows me to sort by tags. So now I've got everything, all the highlights, basically from these 170 plus essays, organized by tag categories. And then, given the limitation of time, I won't show you how I then organized the tags into an order that was sort of my preliminary sense of my storyline, my emerging storyline. So, they were highlights where the tag was about the purpose for the book. Okay, so let me start with purpose. And then I thought then extended mind, and then go to text definitions and so forth, down to my last category, intertwingle, people that talked about how everything is interconnected. So let's see, all of a sudden my screen just blew up a little bit in size. Hold on. All right, I don't know why that is. So once I had all of the highlights with tags and organized into categories, I wanted to start rearranging the high trail into a more story-like structure by adding chapter headings or subtopics. And I could do this within Highlighter itself with provisions for moving things around, or in this particular case, I exported the content and arranged. For some reason, I'm having a little trouble getting this thing to move forward. Hold on, everybody. All right. There we go. So I ended up with 9 chapter headings. And so this is just one person's reorganization of the content of these 170 essays, right, representing multiple perspectives on the future of text. And I'll just quickly, just to get a sense of how it all broke down. Text and the human condition, I put first. The nature of text, its history, aspects, and functions. The benefits of text and obstacles to adoption. The affordances of hypertext and so forth. And then people talked about exploring the future of text by distilling its past. And then there was a bunch of fragments having to do with deep reading and the side effects of the digital age, the differences, the advantages of handwriting in paper versus digital, and this whole topic of digital hybrids. Bunch of stuff on counteracting information disorder. Some people were concerned with how do you access and preserve all this online content for the future. And then maybe a fifth of the highlights were actually on the future of text, people who were forecasting what was coming next. So I have this high trail, and I'm not exactly sure why I'm getting this big, it's over. I have the high trail. And sorry, folks. Let me get this over here. And I now have the high trail arranged by headings. So you see there's about 91 highlights under text and communication, 74 under the nature of text, etc. In the new version of Highlighter, these, when you click on a heading, it'll take you to the heading in the high trail. And you can also rearrange those chapters, because what happens is you set up the chapters and then you may realize, you know what, I think this chapter should go before that one, and so forth. So now here, again, I don't know why my screen is over. I have it set to actual size. There we go, but it's blown up. Okay, so here you see I have inserted a note. So in this, there were a bunch of highlights on people talking about handwriting and how much they love it. And then I wanted to go to a bunch of highlights that were about hybrid versions of paper and digital. So I add a note in between those two highlights to improve coherence. And just as an example of the kinds of things that emerged during this process, in the social machine high trail with 200 highlights, and certainly with the future of text high trail, scrolling down through all that information is time consuming and difficult. So where I manually created a kind of shrink text where I took the first sentence of each fragment and created something that looks like this. And this allowed me to scan through very rapidly all of the highlights. And if you mouse over the shrink text, it pops up the full fragment and comment, and you can toggle back and forth. And this facilitates moving things around to improve your coherence. Now, this is really annoying me. I'm sorry, but I don't understand why. Let's see if I go here. Yeah. Yeah, but it was blowing it up, so I just reduced the size.
Oh, okay.
So so now I've got this storyline, and I'm reading down through it, and it's got gaps. The essays mention a lot of concepts that I don't know very much about. You know, it's interesting, but I want to learn more. So what I did was I went through the high trail and I basically extracted all of the key terms, like, you know, cave writing, automatic poetry, augmented intelligence, and I organized that into a folksonomy. So I had these categories and 18 categories. And under each category, I had different concepts or terms or phrases that fit within that category. And now this is where it really got interesting for me personally. I would take a concept that I wanted to learn more about, go to Google Scholar and see what would come up. And through that process, I found articles that talked about, like, for example, I searched on combinatorial creativity. And from searching on that term, I found concepts like cognitive assemblages, metasynthesis, curiosity-driven exploration, conceptual blending, disassociation, remix culture. So those are, in a sense, are unknown unknowns. And this is something our tech partner, Rosoka, would help us with in the Future of Text project, where Rosoka can help to surface the key terms using zip distribution and other approaches, and then can find articles where the concepts we're interested in have high salience, but also other concepts that we don't know about may have high salience in those same articles. So through that process, we can start to expand our view of the topic. And in a way, what we're doing here is a kind of, and everything in red are the new concepts that emerge through that process. So so this is a kind of going from divergence to convergence and scattering and gathering. And I can't get this thing to, come on, move forward. There we go. Okay. Whoop. And then, okay, so I'm right close to the end here. I know I'm at a half hour. So now here, so I ended up with 365 pages of stuff on this topic. About 80 pages were the fragments, and the rest were just my meanderings and so forth. So what I am in the process of doing now, and this is the kind of scatter, gather, diverge, now converge, I imported the content of the High Trail as a PDF, and now I'm marking it up in Highlighter, and in the process of creating a new High Trail where I just, say, add to High Trail or copy all to High Trail, and everything is now I have a new High Trail that's sort of a reflective exercise. And the other, let me just one other thing, and of note, well, let me just, because the time is running, let me just go back to the to finish up. Yeah, some weird thing. So this is an example of what's possible. This is my article of social machines, and what you see here are embedded in it are links to highlights. So in the future, you can imagine you write a paper, you have links back to the fragments in their sources, so that you have a kind of transparency. The author is providing a window, as Vannevar Bush said, into his or her thinking. These are the sources and the specific fragments, not just the documents, but the blocks of information that went into my thinking. And it might look something like this, where the again, I've got to, for whatever reason, there's
your zoom to 361%.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. It's doing it on its own is the problem. So whoop. Just weird. So imagine that you click on a link in the block in the body of the text, you go to the references, and under the reference, you have a link to the high trail and to the particular fragment with access to its in context in its source, and you see the fragment and the comment as part of the document. And just to finish up, there's all kinds of visualizations that are possible, taking the data. Like here, we did a thing on the Arab uprising, and the machine created a node graph, and you see social media united disparate groups. You click on the link, and it brings up a high trail showing all of the fragments that went into creating that node. So you can see, okay, let me see all the things that people said that fit with this triple. Oh, damn. And then we've talked with Raphael, who also was part of the project, about using his Me software, and that would be another way to export highlights as basically hypercards in rows and columns and very rapidly move them around. Now, just moving to the last slide here. We have a proposal into NSF right now, and I just want to describe briefly 4 studies. One is to treat the high trail as an intermediate outcome between reading and writing, and to have a machine assess coherence. So now, if you're an author or if you're a student, before you start writing your paper, you have a way to see, do I really have a coherent understanding of the topic? And your teacher might be able to, your instructor can help you work through where you maybe have some rough spots in your storyline before you start writing. And we're actually planning an experiment with a professor at GWU where you have, let's say, 20 students, 4 groups of 5 students. Each group reads each individual deep reads 1 article a week in Highlighter. So every week you have 20 articles. At the end of 5 weeks, you have 100 articles. But each individual student has really done a minimum of deep reading because that's something that's hard for them to do. Then you create a high trail of all of those, from the highlights from all of those 100 documents, and each student or group can engage in selective deep reading. As you navigate the high trail, you can decide, you know what, I'm going to read this whole page, not just the fragment, or I'm going to read the whole article. And so this might be sort of a hybrid strategy for getting more students to engage in the kind of deep reading that's necessary to contribute to our knowledge-based economy. And then 2 kind of exciting possibilities, and I'm working with AI people at Florida Institute of Technology and Virginia Tech. Once you have the high trail, you would basically have a model of the reasoning process of the assembler. So you basically kind of generating a replicant of the assembler's thinking process, and then that model could be used by anybody to curate highlights, to go find not documents, but chunks, blocks of information that fit into your storyline. And then there's all this concern now about how are we going to reconcile education with these GPT models that can write papers? Well, using Highlighter, when you pass in a paper, you have to also show the high trail. And you could also work with the GPT model to co-author by taking a few highlights at a time, getting a machine composition, and kind of piecing together in a kind of iterative process a paper that was the result of your efforts with the machine. And I'm going to just jump to the end. Very weird. Hold on. Sorry, but this thing has failed me. Yeah. And that's it, guys. And I'm sorry for the technical problem. I practiced and had no problems with something about the Adobe in this context messed up. Okay. So what I'm proposing is that we import the whatever it is, 500 essays, go through a process of highlighting the high points and create a high trail and integrate some of the machine assistance and see what we come up with. And if there's an interest in that, I think it would be a worthwhile project, but not one that it would take definitely major commitment of time from a work group. So, yeah.
There are questions. I have some. Who would like to go first? Okay, my first question is the coherence bit, which is really fascinating. Can you walk me through a little bit on how you go from doing the kind of highlight tagging to chunking into coherence? Is that manual, automatic, semi-automatic? How does that function?
Well, so for the future of text, what I did was what I did back in 1992. I printed out the content, cut it up into file card size pieces of paper, and laid them out on a table, and the columns emerged. With a product like me, you might be able to do that online because you can create columns and move things across columns and rows and so forth. And also within Highlighter in the new version, there's all kinds of provisions for moving the highlights around. And also when you go back and forth between the shrink text mode and the full text mode, you can really see large amounts of information, and you start to get into this flow state where you're, crafting your storyline with increasing coherence, both local and global.
Very useful. Thank you. Bob?
I'd like to have a short conversation with you about what is the internal structure of what I guess you call story or narrative. And the question is there only one kind of those? If or are there a bunch of different ones?
No, that's a good question. So the most basic idea is that what you're creating with Highlighter is a structured representation, reorganization, a structured extraction, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole, which I'm sure you're familiar with, narrative theory, right? That in the idea in narrative theory is that a story is a series of events arranged in some kind of timeline. And you tell the story in any number of ways. The story could be told an infinite number of ways, but the events happened in a certain order. Now, when you're dealing with, research articles, it's not a story it's not made up of events. It could be. That would be one way to use Highlighter to organize something that was on a timeline. But what I did with the future of text and the way I've used it at other times is that instead of events, I have, to use your, blocks of information. And my storyline is narrative-like in that I'm arranging those blocks of information to have some kind of logical order. And in doing that, I'm applying story thinking. So how many different types of stories and so forth, I'm not sure, exactly what,
About 25. For example, I'll just pick one. How would you show um, pros and cons, that is arguments about different things in highlighter. That's one thing that puzzles me, to fit within what you call story.
Oh, no, that's a good one. Well, you might organize. So let's, I mean, that's actually something, I'll give an example. The speech, I'm very interested in the speech to text technology, which has really gotten amazing, right? So
Yeah.
the idea is let's say our team is meeting for a whole year, once a week, and we have 50 transcripts. So you would import those to Highlighter, and you would tag pieces of conversations that were about the same topic. And they may represent people arguing, no, I think this, I think that. So now you might have multiple high trails from those 50 transcripts that are organized by, this is this particular topic. And underneath that, you might have different subheadings organizing those issues that came up that people disagreed about. And you would have that arranged in a way that, well, he said this and I said that and he said that, and here's where we concluded, right? And that may be, pulling in from many different weeks, or this may have been going on a whole year where that topic came up 6 months after the previous time. And now you have a way to keep track of these threads of conversation that get lost. Yeah. Froda.
With Bob Horn and Jim Strayhorn's encouragement, our journal has a lot of bold in it to help. When I go through like this transcript we're doing now, I will probably bold what I'm saying now because I think it's important. I'm the editor. So I'm wondering if it might be interesting to have a system whereby the editor's bolding can be treated as one initial highlight. So when it goes into highlighter, it's already got one layer, which may or may not be used depending on the reader, but at least what the editors have thought about might go in there. And related to that is, it's very, very lovely and a bit surprising how similar what I'm doing in Author with the map is to this, which is great. Obviously, we're working on the same kind of issues. I'm also looking, now that I'm having to do corrections for my PhD, I hate the idea of a reference manager because they could be amazing, but they're all horrible. And the reason I think they're horrible comes down to one basic thing. If I highlight something in a PDF that's in a reference manager, I cannot search based on that highlighted text, which is insane to me. So in my own reader, I'm probably going to have a function to do that. You can search across documents for highlighted text. That is nowhere near the level of intelligence of what you're doing, because you're also doing the tagging. But it does make me think that maybe there is something in the water or something in the air about these issues now. So maybe we should think of a kind of interchange format so that if I do all this stuff in my world, I can put it into highlighter without too much effort. And then when we're kind of done, Brandel can just take it and suddenly, we walk around in it. And then Fabian can take it and suddenly we can walk around with it and compute based on it. What do you think, David?
No, we actually had a conversation with Hypothesis, of which there's like 500,000, 750,000 users.
Was it Dan
They're
Whaley?
using,
Dan Whaley?
Yeah,
Yeah, brilliant.
exactly.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, and he was very interested in highlighter because they have a wonderful annotation system, but they don't have the sense making part of it. And we have our eyes set on being able to pull in annotations from Hypothesis and just put them into highlighter. But part of our biggest limitation, there are, a million things we could do if we had the engineering resources. So at this point,
Same here.
yeah, right. It's about get a product out and get a revenue stream going, and we can hire more engineers. And that's also why I'm, going after research funding as well. So, yeah, I mean, I agree that the ideal solution is to have a ability to pass information back and forth. Now, fortunately, things like Rosoka, which is an entity extraction and NLP product, and other AI type products are designed to pass information between applications. So there's already some things in place to make it easy to integrate with machine intelligence, and but taking other sources like reader sources into Highlighter would be a neat thing to do, and other types of annotation sources.
Yeah, Hypothesis does seem like a good kind of intermediary. Thanks for that. Peter.
Yes, I was wondering, does Highlighter operate as a desktop app or is it a web-based application? What's the actual user interface like on that at the top level?
It's all web-based, and I can just tell you real quickly, the back end for you technical guys is Elixir and Erlang. The database is Postgres. The front end is Svelte with IBM Carbon design system, and we deploy containers and Docker. And I have to say that getting the HighTrail to function with very large files, like 100 megabyte files, and to behave the same way as a file took months. It was really, really challenging. But now that we have it, it's amazing. So you can pull in virtually any size book into Highlighter and do the same kind of markup. And the HighTrail is going to navigate. I was going to show you that, but the screw up with the presentation, kind of messed me up. So that can be another time.
PM.
So I'm wondering what
Well-
the sentiment is, and Bob, over to you maybe, about trying to transform the essays into something else, which is, for example, let me just throw this out. One insight that I got from this process of creating the HighTrail is that no one actually was applying the methodology of forecasting, which is a very developed science, and it's a huge industry, right? The military spends billions of dollars worldwide trying to figure out what's coming down the pipe, as do large corporations in trying to anticipate. So there is a methodology that's really evolved and rather sophisticated, but that's not what the essays really reflect. And so one thought was, wouldn't it be interesting to take the essays and apply a more of a forecasting, foresighting methodology and see where that might take us, and you end up then with some kind of a different book than the essays themselves, and now you've done sort of a crowdsourcing of celebrity or superior thinkers on a topic, and then synthesized all that thinking into something else with input from other, going out on the web and, gee, so-and-so mentioned this concept. We need to know more about it. And then you go and do what I did, what I call mental deflections. Once you've got that initial HighTrail, and you start to fill in on the topic. And
Well, I, of course, worked on intelligence analysis and improving it for 3.5 years just before COVID. So there is a whole, I would recommend that you look at or get into some sort of list that IARPA sends out, because you may be able to join with other teams and work on their, they're working in the same way as DARPA on how to do high risk, high reward work in intelligence analysis, which is just more advanced than most academic activities.
well,
I want to so
Bob, let me just jump in just right there. We
Yeah.
actually had a contract with NCTC that ended up not going through because of sequestration. The senior analyst for NCTC, which is the umbrella for the intelligence community, looked at highlighter, turned to the CTO of the NCTC and say, we don't have this and we need it. Every analyst should have highlighter. However, and IARPA has something called Reason project right now, and
Yeah, it's
they
just
basically
started.
describing highlighter. And not to sound, I don't want to get into any kind of political debate, but I just am not interested in getting funding
Oh,
from
okay.
the US intelligence community, given the history
Mhm.
of what, even though I know a lot of people and they're wonderful people, not so much with the government's policies. So
That's all
almost
right.
anywhere
I just,
else.
you know, I
Yeah.
thought you mentioned it, and so I thought I'd follow
No,
up
no,
on it.
that's a natural
I
thought.
didn't have to,
Yeah.
you know, all right, it's all right. The main thing I'm interested in was, and by the way, my uh, 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 computer somehow got dropped out in the middle of your presentation for a while, but I was interested in the tags,
Mhm.
the tagging. You had about 25 of them that you listed.
Yep.
And I noticed that, you know, that there weren't tags for a couple of the things that you mentioned, you know, graciously, of the reflections that I was interested in. That is, there wasn't a tag for the problems that we have with hypertext, or with future of text, or with gaps. And so I was looking for that. So I scanned the list. How would you be able to go back and add tags?
Oh yeah,
to all of those
absolutely. And
articles? And
yeah, and so that's a really good point, because you know, I didn't really have a clear purpose when I started, right? So
Yeah.
your 4 questions completely redefine. I mean, I would say I wouldn't like, I mean, what I did is a nice pilot study, but I would
Mhm.
probably want to, if we did a project, I'd probably start over. Let's do another review of volume 1, because we'd be looking for different things for sure.
Would you think that you would select different chunks of text?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
In place. Yeah. And I would probably, when I first went through it, I kind of wanted to be inclusive. I didn't want to leave anybody out. So for every essay, I at least highlighted one thing, and I tried to think, well, let me start off with that value being, you know, take a little bit of, even if I wasn't necessarily interested personally in the topic, but now
Did you create the list of tags beforehand, or was that something
no,
that you
just as I went
added
through.
to?
Yeah, it was like, oh, this is what I highlighted. It falls into these categories. And I wasn't
Yeah.
thinking, what are the challenges? What are the problems? That I would have, I think, a different set. And, you know, we
Yeah.
could certainly draw on my initial list and then add to it. It would be a different list. It would have some of the same things, but
Would you sent us this really big file with
right.
A lot of very interesting quotes from a lot of interesting people, you know,
Right.
running from anthropologists to
Right.
psychotherapists to I don't know all. Very interesting reading list that you engage in, and I was wondering how, and I read the first 2 chapters of it, which goes about 100 and 120 or so pages. It was hard for me to determine what the story was. I mean, what you know, how you know, I was trying to figure out how you thought of a story in that.
Okay, so if you just read the fragments.
No, I read all the.
I know, but if you just read the
quotes.
fragments, they would have much more of a narrative-like structure.
Oh.
But those fragments sent me off on side trails that weren't, you know, because of this idea, look for far transfer, go look for things that aren't obviously associated. And that's why the next step was, okay, 300, this was very scattered.
Mhm.
Import highlighter, import the high trail, mark it up to come back to and arrange a story that is more narrative like, because I purposely went like this because I was having a lot of fun,
Yeah.
basically exercising curiosity. Like I'd never heard of remix culture, and it's a big deal. It's something that emerged from hip hop music and spread to academia. And it's a movement to make plagiarism sort of legal. It's recognized, and it's coming along at a time with GPT models, the idea is that, hey, everybody borrows from everybody else. Let's not be so hung up about copyright and ownership. But any rate, that's the kind of, oddball. It was kind of an odd side trail, right? And so now when you bring that scattered high trail back in and mark it up a second time as a meta high trail, now you're starting to get something that's more convergent, more succinct, and has a clearer storyline. And I'll just mention, if you looked at my museum high trail, it reads like a book, the fragments, because it just had an obvious order to it. This topic is all over the place by its very nature. And that's the thing, I think, Frode, that's so interesting. The big idea in technology is text to X, right? That's what all this GAI stuff is about. I feed the machine a description of my house and it creates a picture, right? Or whatever. I feed it some text on a topic and it gives me a composition and so forth. So, there's this, the topic is so broad. And so that's what I really indulged in exploration, using the essays as sort of a jumping off point into lots of topics that I didn't know much about. And so that high trail is a little bit hard, if I just gave you the fragments, which are 85 pages, it reads much more in a coherent way.
Well, I'm going to look at the chapter at the one called Obstacles to Adoption and what was it? Counteracting information disorder, because I think that's where I might find the problems.
Yeah.
In that where you might have already extracted a good bit of what I'm interested in, which is
the other interesting. So when you talk about forecasting, they identify dependencies. Here's a possible future, but only if this, and this happen first, right? And there were in the last section on foresighting and forecasting, there were people that said, corporations have a stranglehold on the internet. If that isn't broken, we're not going to get to this vision of, social equity and democratization of knowledge. And other people like Dame Wendy Hall with her 4 types of internets, where the government, which is what governments do and have done since the first clay tablets, take control of the media to try and keep the people in power. So until that's broken. So those are problems, challenges we face with text if we want to have, some vision of a bright future that isn't just a autocracy of some kind or whatever.
Well, we can circumvent it to an extent, and I want to press a little bit more on the kind of interchange issue, because even now in Reader, I've just cobbled together, if you copy text and paste it in an email from a document, it'll give you basic citation information. But I think it would be much more worthwhile if in whatever system you highlight something, you could share that highlight with others. And it shares, of course, where it is in the document and what document. But if it can also share highlight level tags, that could be very, very interesting. So I guess hypothesis is actually a good mechanism for that to an extent, but you may not be able to just select text in a document that is of a specific interest and copy it and give it to someone and have a hypothesis wrapper around it. I mean, for instance, I used the example at the beginning of the call. I'm going to be doing revisions for my thesis, and Mark Anderson has worked on a lot of that. So I'm probably going to be reading his work, which is great. But what I would also like, you know, different people in this community are experts on different things, kind of subscribe to an RSS feed of sorts of their highlights of what they're reading within a field that I care about. You know, Fabian posts a lot of stuff on social media, and it's worth reading, but I don't own it then. If Fabian was doing things and I could have it in a way that could go into my library and I could search it in the future and I could find where it came from and I could see if it was done in a highlighter type manner, what extra metadata had been generated, it becomes really portable, and it's such small data and it's such an open protocol that may circumvent a lot of this corporate nonsense. Now, I'm going to pause recording for a second.
So let me share one quick anecdote about, I think, not so that we don't miss this point. So when I did my dissertation, I used the same method that I used in the writing the paper, except instead of putting things on the floor, I got cardboard panels and put them in a big circle around me, and I sat in the middle and I put snippets up on fragments, pieces of paper up on the panels all around me. And when I would just move them around and rearrange them, and I would know where to look, because what happens is you have the highlight, you have the fragment, but you forget the context. So you want to go back. Oh yeah, this came from this article, this page, and so forth. And in a way, once you have all that information organized, it's also organized in your head. And that's really what I think the secret sauce to the system is. It's a learning technology, kind of is a forced kind of review, because as I explained, you're activating your story thinking process in your brain, and over time you go from crystallized intelligence to fluid intelligence, and you're not just summarizing, but you're moving beyond that to see combinations and associations that aren't obvious. And I just mentioned, not to blow my horn here, but my dissertation won the Gagne Award in my field for best dissertation. And I almost knew I was going to win it when I passed it in, because I had this just sense of I understand this stuff in a way, it felt like magic, but it was the result of using my mind in a way that promotes learning in a very efficient manner. But it doesn't mean that, oh, we just push a button and it happens. No, it's still hours, but it's well spent hours that leads. And so with this technology, whether it's Reader or Highlighter, what I'm trying to do with Highlighter is create a scaffolding to assist people in that process. And the cool thing about the High Trail is it's a stigmergic mechanism that provides a structure or a trace of mental activity so that anyone can participate in theory. Now, we haven't tried this out yet. I'm the only one that's used it. But the idea is that once you have that High Trail, anybody else can start reviewing it and say, you know what, there's a gap here. I know something that'll fit in slot 40. Or we're missing a chapter. I'm going to bring in a chapter, and so forth. And that would also be part of the experiment on the future of text. See what it is like to engage in a collaborative team construction of a High Trail.
Well, I will make one other comment, which is on your deep reading comments. I've been fortunate, partially because of you this week and partially because of another friend of mine, a physicist up in Canada, who has been reading Kuhn's last papers, which have just been published.
Huh.
Kuhn, the
Paradigm guy,
the Scientific Revolutions book,
Yeah.
that is so fundamental. And what he told me he did was spend the last week copying out chunks from that book, and he sent me all the chunks.
Mm-hmm.
So two times this week, I've gotten, people like you and people like Bert sending me whole files of chunks that I can use, that I'm learning from and using without having to read the whole whole darn thing.
Right.
which is a huge I mean, I can't tell you how grateful I am not to have to read sorry, Frode, not to have to read the whole first volume, but to be able to read the chunks that David has picked out as key, because at least part of it, it's his doing some work for me, doing some skimming and selecting, and that's what my friend Bert did for the Kuhn book. So maybe there's a start of also what shall I say, a social movement. There are only 2 or 3 of us yet, but maybe that's what is part of the of what's going on, because we're all together are realizing that in order to make progress, we need to be able to exchange large chunks of but edited chunks of information.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes the way that academic writing is, and chapters and other kinds of things, is not the best way to convey information. Often it's a few chunks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bob. Brendel, good morning.
Morning. Really interesting use of sort of manipulation of documents and sort of sharing snippets of it. If you wanted to respond to what Bob said, I was going to go in a slightly different direction. But
No, well, just one quick. I think throughout history, literacy skills have changed as a result of new technologies coming into use. And what's happening now is, with the digital revolution, there's a lag between the ways people are used to reading, writing, and communicating, and the affordances of the technology, and the fact that you have the storehouse of human knowledge at your fingertips, instead of having to go to the library and spend all day looking for stuff. And so that is where having this efficiency of just show me the gold nuggets, but with the ability to link back to the context, because sometimes you want to see, well, wait a minute, where did this come from and what came before and after? So, but I do think, Bob, that's what's happening, is things are changing again, like has happened in the past, and we need to catch up, and Highlighter's an attempt to do that, frankly. So go ahead.
Yeah, that awesome. I'm glad you were able to respond with that. I mean, I would also add that it takes a while, and it also takes a certain kind of person, possibly even from a certain age, to be able to kind of pick apart at the notional thingness of what it is that we're passing back and forth. This idea that, like, a book has this integrity, that means that we don't mess with it. Maybe it requires people of a certain age and a certain awareness of what their actual requirements are to be able to decohere that book and say, damn it, I need to send this piece to this person for this reason. The question that I had, David, was about, you said that you cut in order to make sense of those categories and build the folksonomy for the future of textbook. You did what you did with your dissertation as well, which was to print it out, cut it up, arrange it on a table. I have my own reason, my own guesses as to why you didn't do that on a computer. But can you talk a little bit about what about that process needed to be tangible, needed to be physical, and things?
Yeah, so interesting. When we first developed the product, I went to Virginia Tech and met with this guy, Chris North, who had a laboratory called the Gigapixel Laboratory, and he was studying large arrays for the intelligence community. And he had wall size arrays, and he had like 6-panel arrays, because I thought, isn't it kind of ironic, speaking of the future of text, that we have more and more information at our fingertips, but people are obsessed with the little screen of the iPhone. And what I'm excited about is projecting onto the wall so that I could do what I did on the floor. And in fact, Chris was involved with technology that's used around the world in war rooms, where you can physically, virtually move documents and pieces of information, images around on the screen with your hand gestures. And there's research to show that that really facilitates performance by the analysts. But in the new version of Highlighter, there will be many more provisions for moving highlights around. In the old version, I could just move one at a time. And with 600 highlights, not practical. I could export to Word and copy and paste and then import back. That's something that the old version did. I liked the idea of having, reading the research. When you have your hands on a book or a piece of paper, it activates different parts of your brain. So I was just trusting, you know what, I'm going to do this with a hands-on thing, not in Word or Google Docs. And that's why I also showed Raphael's product, which, I don't know if he's going to go forward with that, but we want to do something like that, where you can, just like Zoom has rows and columns. If I had the rows and columns and could easily navigate, then moving things around, I could do it digitally, and especially with the shrink text. I can have a lot of information on the screen at once moved around. But some of these things have yet to be, a lot of things I just did manually and said, well, maybe a machine could do this, in 1/10 of the time or 1,000th of the time, right? But ironically, because it's taken so long to develop the software, I'm not the engineer, so I had to figure out something to do with my time. So I put probably 300 hours into the Future Text project, but it was more, what Bob noticed, where did those 300 pages come from that are on all these different topics? Because it's, it's providing kind of a foundation for an exploration, right? And the other thing, just going back to what was said earlier, I don't know yet whether I create a high trail that has high coherence, and I share that with everyone here. Would that be a good starting point for each of you for your own inquiry, or to get you up to speed on that topic? That's the assumption. And Bob, you said, oh, it was very helpful, I got this and I got that, but we need to do research. That's a researchable question. Just how useful is it to have those snippets, maybe with links back, and compared to if somebody just reads through everything the old-fashioned way, right? And you would think that, possibly people are going to be able to cover much more information in the same amount of time as someone that's reading and, doing the work from scratch, and also possibly have a better learning curve, because you're spending your time focusing on the high value stuff and not a lot of extraneous stuff. But that, I think, has to be shown empirically.
Can I follow up on that just quickly? When I was reading the 2 chapters of the longer version with your annotations, and also the beginning one, I wanted to know, could you create a table of contents for me for chapters? Because I couldn't tell what the structure of the chapter was in the longer version. That was the first chapter was 100 pages.
Right.
That needs a table of contents. for because particularly maybe not for beginning learners who've never read all that stuff, but I read many of the things that you've read and excerpted there. So I don't need to reread them again. I need to know what's in there.
Yeah, so that's why the note feature, the notes I put in manually, but in the new version, what I would, to address what you just said is, you know, I might have a block of highlights that are related. So I would insert, hey, this is what this is about, blah, blah, blah. And that could be shown up above as a subtopic in the table of contents. But what I did was I just created a document with the notes and then inserted them in. I didn't have any convenient way to do it automatically. The new version, you'll be able to say, I'm going to put a note here, boom, and it pops up. But I didn't have that. But that's how I would deal with what you just, the issue you just described.
So it's not hard to make a table of contents from a nodal structure. Is that right?
Yeah, because the machine will recognize, okay, these are all the notes. These are the headings. I'll make a table of contents from that with links back to them. That's on the roadmap. We don't have that yet, but that's, so by doing the
Frode
future
has been working on that. Frode has been working on
Yeah.
that with a nodal thing. Can you make Frode? Can you make a table of contents from your nodal structure?
I don't actually know what you mean by that. I mean, the book itself, of course, has a table of contents. Are you talking about the table of contents for the highlights?
Well, I was with David, yeah. But I was noticing that you also had been working on a nodal structure.
Yeah,
as a kind of index. I thought of it as a kind of index rather than a kind of a table of
yeah,
contents.
like an index, right? That's a good analogy.
okay, hang on a second. So I was going to show you an information thing, but what you call the nodal structure, which I call the map, which is now a mess because I have to tidy it up. These are all concepts. They're all defined concepts. So Command D, write what it is. I can tag it if I like to help turn things on and off, because I found that with maps, it's really important to choose to hide stuff, which is a big thing. It doesn't in any way have a kind of a heading to it, other than in the spatial hypertext sense, and the loosest term. Please don't kill me, Mark. That I put something here, and then it's a different font, and I put things underneath it. But what I will be doing is along these lines is under defined concepts. I mean, it's a mess. There's too many. Is I'm going to have some subsections and also for references. So the kind of organization is important with this. But there was something else that I really wanted to highlight to you guys, and that's this Shannon diagram, which I think we should really take seriously into account. All it says is, for information transmission, you have a source, transmitter, channel, receiver, and destination. So my insight, at least I think it's an insight, that happened yesterday, is that we tend to think of the source and the destination as being separate from the transmission. And I think that is really, really wrong. And what was discussed over the last few minutes really helps me highlight that. I'm going to not share this because then you're going to read and get confused. But look at it this way. If you have two people talking, just normal humans talking, one person wants to explain something, for instance, why they think universal healthcare, like we have in the UK, is fine. That's one of those topics people would discuss. There isn't a fully formed thing in here that is neutral and objective and beautiful, and the other person is an idiot. I'm trying to be, lighthearted here. The information doesn't happen between these two. I think it's really important to take into account that the information happens within the sender and receiver, because if the receiver cannot parse what is being sent, there isn't the information there. The information is the whole shape. Another way of looking at it is if you paint a picture to communicate to someone, and that person is colorblind, they won't get the information you intended. If, when you're talking about health service, you are shouting or using weird language, you're communicating something entirely different from what you think. You're communicating that you're an arrogant bastard. You're not communicating the benefits of a health service, right? So this is why the whole idea of what is here and what is there has to be together. I think this is really, really important for us to take into account when we're looking at these types of things, because even if you have something as supposedly objective as a JSON string, if one piece of software produces a JSON string and another piece of software doesn't have the knowledge how to parse it, that's not information, right? Information is not what is stored. Information is the entire package. Earlier, David in the presentation talked about pausing things in the communication, which I think is a very important thing to do. And I think it's also extremely important to understand that we don't know what we're talking about. That's why we need highlights, trails, because it is to help us understand our own thoughts, right? So for them to think that in a certain way we can communicate it clearly to someone else is of course a fantasy, but it's something we have to try. And this is why it's so important that we try also to find the resources to have these information bits be interchangeable. Hopefully David's system will be as brilliant as we see it, but it must be allowed to compete with other systems. You know, if somebody wants to work in David's system and then maybe Chris starts developing something, and we all hear every once in a while, we talk about the VR aspect of it. It can't go to VR unless the VR can take this stuff. So I just wanted to, even though I'm text all the time, I just really wanted to highlight how important it is that we try to step back and look at the whole information journey, because information has to be in a journey. When it's not on a journey, it's not information. It is something which is stored. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wanted to just throw in a theorist from the 90s, Roy P. wrote conversation theory. And I don't think this contradicts what you're saying, but it's a little different way of thinking. So his description of a conversation is, I say something to you, you say something back to me. You may not have understood quite what I meant, but when you say it back to me, I appropriate your meaning because yeah, that's it. Because you actually said it better than I did, right? So that's how conversations often go in reality, right? It's you may even misunderstood what I said, but when you spoke back to me, I liked better your misunderstanding than what I was trying to say. So that happens in conversations. And the same thing with the high trail. My comments may have a very different meaning. And I just want to mention one other thing, that along with using highlighter, there is a social reading etiquette. So you can't highlight and make comments like in your book as a private activity. This is you're now publishing, so that what you highlight should be complete enough so that somebody can make sense of it without having to go back to the source. And your comment should be coherent enough that it's clear and well written, so that so it's a kind of a reciprocal contract that we're going to share in this sense-making effort, and we're all going to try and do our best to make the information clear, as you were talking about, and communicable.
I think that's very important, David, the interactive part of it, because working on the map and so on, everything I do highlights that, even not just talking to another human being, which you're completely correct about, but also communicating with the document, there is an interactive back and forth. You need to be able to change things. And also a sentence that I was looking for earlier is, what information comes from how it can be processed when received. Right, that is absolutely crucial, because it has to be processable by the receiver. And that part of the problem there is, I think it's called the tyranny of knowledge or something. Once you know something, it's really difficult to remember what it was to not know something. So therefore, depending on the subject, it can be hard to communicate with someone to teach them that. Curse of knowledge. Yes, thank you. That's exactly what it is.
Right. Mhm.
Mark,
There was one other thing.
Mark, how about Mark? He's got his hand up.
Oh, well, Mark's got his hand up. Oh, yeah. I can't believe you're waiting for me to shush, Mark, but please go ahead.
That's all right. No, you hear far too much from me anyway. Now, what prompted me to put my hand up was I was really interested when you were talking about the sort of channel communication thing, because it struck a chord with something that I've been tugging on for a while, which comes out of writing large hypertext, non-literary hypertext, and we were talking in my university sort of lab group about authoring it, and basically I was getting lots of literary theory, which all of which breaks down when you move out of the literary domain into the actual knowledge domain. People get very upset about that because they want to fit it. But the point being that what I found when writing, because invariably my writing is for other people, not for myself, is that an aspect of communication is vernacular. So you'll interact with someone and you're trying to find out why they've not been able to get traction in something. You know the information that they've described as needing is there, but they've been able to basically find the right trail through it, bearing in mind there are no sort of handholds. There's a hypertext, you go where you need to. One of the things that really comes up is, and I suppose vernacular is the best word, in a sense, it's terribly fine often, the just a small contextual shift, and then you see someone's off and running and they can sort of self-serve all the way. So I think that in a way relates to what you're doing. And I was interested when David was describing the conversation, because I think that's so true. Again, so I do a lot of sort of support work for people, and it's often just getting someone to describe the problem. They've normally solved it. So just the articulation outside your own mind is often a massive removal of roadblock. You know, being able to, I suppose, the act of leaving it less fuzzy than it is in your mind and turning it into form, giving it some form, is enough sometimes to just kick you over the point of uncertainty that you had before. And as you say, and even you yourself may not realize it in the moment, but the other person then describes what you've said and you thought, oh, right, that's what it's all about. Something that you'd sort of known but hadn't quite fixed on for a while. And I just come the other thing that prompted me is I do think it's really interesting, this idea of sort of public writing, because another thing that I find myself running across a lot, dealing with people who are basically working with sort of PKM tools, personal management, annotation, is I think people struggle with the concept of private and public, in that they don't want to let go of control. And they want to do it their way, and they want their notes to be very private, and that's fine. But that doesn't externalize very well often, because by holding on to your own particular approach or view or something, you often make it unintentionally very hard for anybody else to understand, because in essence you're writing for one person yourself and merely hoping that others will understand. I certainly find that if you let go of that notion and you start working with the intent saying, well, almost all the time saying, how could this possibly be misunderstood at the most trivial level, is often helpful. So I don't know if that contributes much, but some really interesting thoughts. And I just want to say, David, fabulous. I'd love to see all the work you've done on it. And I was privileged to see some at a very early stage way back, and I'd love to see what you've made out of it.
Yeah, and I just would say that going from vision to a functioning, viable product, you know, I think of, you know, going from frosting to baking the cake. The work is in the cake baking, and it's been extremely challenging, and a lot of, oh, we're almost there. You know, they have a saying in software development, the last 10% is actually the 90% that you thought you'd already gotten done. And with Highlighter, the good news is it means that it's not easy for somebody to duplicate instantly what we've done and go off with it. But finally, I mean, I'm here today because we're within, you know, some weeks, reasonable number of weeks of having something we could, if there is the energy and interest, try out. Because, you know, I think, you know, here somehow you've managed to get, I don't know how many essays there are now, but if it's similar, each volume has a similar number, you're up around 500 essays. And these aren't just, you know, anybody off the street. These are some of the leading thinkers, artists, technologists, scholars around the world in different cultures with different lenses. And it would be very interesting to see, well, what can we, starting with that, which, you know, this isn't an insult, but it is more like a coffee table book now, right? You might pick it up and open it up and be inspired by an essay. But as far as, you know, synthesizing all of this knowledge into something that has deep insights that and can be used, like as Bob was saying, to maybe, you know, to actually produce something of value, that's a whole other step. And the only other thing I wanted to say is that and this for some people is very controversial. If you go back to Vannevar Bush's article, he talks about the kind of frontiers people making these trails as being a special class of people that would do it for everybody else. And the vision that I have, at least for Highlighter, is that, look, as Lanier wrote in Who Owns the Future, and as we see happening with robotics and so forth, the middle class jobs are going to be in the knowledge economy, not in the factories. And we're not doing a great job of preparing the next generation to be able to harvest, not just summarize, but harvest new ideas from the internet and their interactions. And so the little motto I have is using Highlighter, so-called average people can do exceptional work, and exceptional people can do even more than they'd done previously. But the idea is, and this remains to be seen, people who right now, if you said, "I'll write a paper on a topic and come up with a new idea," they'd look at you, "Are you out of your mind?" And I'm speculating that with like what we're doing with Carol Rentis at GWU and her students, we let people have a distributed deep reading and selective deep reading experience leading to a paper and get a taste for what it feels like to create new knowledge, to come up with a new idea, to be a contributor. And that might get people going that otherwise wouldn't even dream of being able to contribute. And I would say increasingly, if you want to make a decent living, you're going to have to develop these skills. And fortunately, you know, we have machine technology and artificial intelligence and GPT and GAI that may also contribute to making this realizable.
Brandel, why don't you go before me? You haven't, I've had a lot of airtime and you haven't. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So I think it makes sense to imagine a special category of people who have sort of this charge and this ability, and in many regards, folks like Cory Doctorow play that role today in terms of being able to kind of connect and synthesize information and create really interesting and compelling kind of threads between things. Another thing that I think is really valuable to sort of countenance is what is the most flippant and naive use of the tool or the principles that you're espousing? What are the things that would be maybe failing to grasp the best principles of it, but nevertheless, what might be the most obvious and you know, from a cost structure for one, but also from a user interaction perspective, how do you support those people is very, very valuable insofar as it allows people to sort of escalate their use, because it means that you're making the first part of that on-ramp as approachable as possible. And what do you imagine to be the most, like I said, like sort of flippant, naive use and that you can sort of possibly count on?
Oh, that's a great question, because we've been discussing that as where do we go first? Where's the low-hanging fruit? Let's not try and take on a research team at NSF or something, right? As our first tryout external. And as an example, we know this, someone that's a friend of one of my colleagues owns a high-rise maintenance business. And they showed him Highlighter. He said, oh my God, that would be so useful, because every building has different requirements. Every city has different local ordinances. Every state has different requirements. Departments, Department of Health versus the fire department. And it's so difficult to get my teams to know what they should do. I could just create a high trail. So that's the idea of a structured extraction. On the other far end is a group of leading thinkers on a topic, create a high trail, and then we spawn a machine replicant based on the reasoning process that went into that high trail, and we give it to everybody. So if you're interested in that topic, you can point it at a repository of 10 million documents or whatever, and it will come back with the gold nuggets, the kinds of things that those leading thinkers would come back with, and maybe even arrange it into at least an initial narrative-like structure. And these are things that I thought, well, now that can't happen. And what people are telling me, yeah, in the last year and a half, the AI intelligence the machine intelligence has matured to the point where what I just described is in the adjacent possible. So that means a complete transformation, I think, on what it means to do multi-document sense making, right? How to tap into large volumes of information that are available and do something with it, not just summarize it, but actually solve a hard problem, come up with an innovative solution or product.
And that would have to do with the, I'm back on the tagging and trying to read 100 pages without a table of contents. What I'm understanding is, even now with your system, if when I tagged these chunks, I could rearrange them by selecting different groups, different clusters of tags.
Yep.
And your system would rearrange the chunks so that I could read them in that order. Is that right?
Yeah, so, I mean, Rosoka, which is an NLP application used extensively by analysts, it goes into a repository and it categorizes text using something like 35 categories, right? People, places, things, chemicals, weapons, and so forth. And so when the analyst goes into a document that's been marked up by the machine, all those pieces are tagged. In Highlighter, you could bring them into Highlighter and say sort by tags, and now those 38 categories of fragments are arranged each in their own container. And then using more advanced tools that are in the high trail, you could arrange the order of the tags in a preferred order and then just read it. Read down through. Now, as far as the local coherence within each container, to what extent a machine could create some kind of coherent order, who knows, right? But the machine could go in and summarize very neatly what's in that container for you, right? And even write a composition based on that. But these are all things for future experiment. But, the really interesting thing is, people say, oh, GPT is going to take over writing. Well, it doesn't know anything. It's just building on what's already on the internet, right? And the point is, the human, by engaging in this deep reading, deep interaction with the content and other people, is actually making changes inside your brain that can lead to the moments of insight. And that's what this is all about to a large extent. Chance favors the prepared mind. Thank you, Dr. Pasteur. Well,
I've tried Chat GPT, particularly on the argumentation case that I gave you earlier. That is, tell me the pros and cons of a particular issue, and it will do it. Reasonably good first draft, better
Right.
than most undergraduate students anyway, and probably better than I could, and certainly faster.
Right. Well, the idea is that some of the new GPT models point you to the sources where it got its information from, and that's critical for Highlighter, because whatever whatever you write, it has to link back so that somebody can track. Well, let's see the evidence for what you're claiming here. Oh, well, you cherry picked, you left out things, or there's an inconsistency, whatever. So the machine isn't doing it really is a collaborative effort to make sense with the machine helping, not doing the work. All the work. Yeah.
Chris.
Yep. I noticed a lot of the conversations tended to have more to do with like user experience and not so much the actual engineering of how to manage the artifacts involved in, all these tools we're talking about are obviously very useful and well thought out. But I was wondering if ultimately how much interest is there in like my area of content-based addressing and decomposing information into immutable chunks that we can graph out. Don't need infrastructure, don't need any proprietary tools that can live forever, in that sense. I think in a different angle, from a more
No, I think we're probably on the same page. So one thing, the immutability of the fragments and the documents is essential. You can't have Highlighter if things are changing, right? But the idea of accessibility. So when we're not there yet with multi-tenant architecture, but just think about this: we can give you an account and 1,000 other people with thousands of documents for about $5 a month, not per person, for everything. As far as that's how cheap the server infrastructure has become. So we're not necessarily going to give it away for free, but we're on the same page of we want to make this available to anyone with an internet connection, 75 megabytes connection, and can afford $5 a month or something like that. And then also, there'll be contexts where it's freely available. We're just not in a place to go open source with this because just the history of how we got to where we are. We took private money to get here over a long period of time. But so did you want to say more on?
Well, I think it was more even versus cost, just the engineering perspective, like using hash references instead of document files and traditional desktop apps and web pages and all that. Breaking information out of those.
Well, the High Trail does that to some extent, right? You're pulling stuff out and then you can export it to other applications with the link back to the source still there, so you don't lose context. But the idea is that these are it's movable type in a way, right? You could move it to another location, another application, and then even spin it up in some new form and bring it back in, and very much want to have that. That's why we've spent the last 4 years rebuilding the product. It's been, have plasticity, scalability, and interoperability as key values. But it would be interesting if you have a conversation with our lead engineer, and it might be worthwhile just to see what direction you're going and how Highlighter might fit with that kind of thinking, or how you might inform our thinking, frankly. So thank you.
Mark, can I just show something real quick before you go on? Okay, thanks very much. Not that you have a choice, but thank you. This is relating to both the sharing and headings and all of that stuff we've been discussing. So this is just Reader. I know I'm not suddenly trying to sell Reader in this context, but I want to show you this. I select text and I do highlights, right? And this used to be really horrible. I'm going to do in 2 different colors in PDF. But if I now, actually, I do it full screen. If I now fold into an outline, these highlights show up really cleanly. So a modern PDF is not total shit. So here you can see the term scholarly communication, I've highlighted in the section background. A brief history of scholarly communication, this is what I've highlighted with spaces in between. Right, so you see it was a bit odd cut off, but that's because I selected it odd. So I'm just saying that I really would, hang on. The whole sharing bit, I think we can do something together here where, you know, here you copy something and then you go to an email. That's not an email. I really want to be able to go in and out of highlighter like this where, well, that doesn't do it for that document. So that was very embarrassing, but you know, to have the basic addressability information included. And
So that's perfect because the marker idea is that you can insert a fragment from any external source and capture its link back to that source, even though you don't have it in highlighter. You at least can expand the conversation, your story, to have fragments that come from outside of highlighter, that either from work done by people elsewhere or you just don't have access to, that you can't bring it in. So yeah, that makes total, you know, that's something we could play around with probably pretty soon, Frode, to see what that feels like.
yeah, it would be nice to be able to move things around.
Yeah,
That'd be great. And Mr. Anderson, you have the last word.
Yeah, very quickly, and this one it's short, but it's not a hidden loaded question. It's just that. So if I've got a sort of fragment in the system, I can insert the same fragment multiple times into the same trail. Can I? I'm basically thinking about non-linearity, and it might seem odd, but you might need to loop back in the trail. Or
no, we have a feature where when you go to something that's repeated, it'll list the links to the other 3 or 4 that are in the trail and takes you back and forth and so forth.
Sorry, I figured as much. It's just I didn't see it, so I thought I'd ask.
Well, the other thing we have are bi-directional links,
sure,
where you can tag one highlight with the ID number of another highlight, and now you have a 2-way link. And with transclusion, when you mouse over that tag, it'll pop up the highlight that's in some other distant document, and then you can immediately navigate to it. So we've only begun to play around with that. That's a real, you know, classic hypertext kind of feature.
And it's a very cool feature. Yeah. Okay, Peter, last word.
Yeah, just a quick question. Have you thought about making it possible to run the system locally? Because there are a lot of law firms that would probably be interested in the highlighter technology, but they'd be loath to have anything being hosted out in the cloud for security considerations.
Oh no, we have, you can, it's very easy to deploy this in a Docker container on any server behind a firewall. And
very good, very good.
Yeah,
That'll
and we've had interest from law firms. The problem with law firms is they have a very established technology base already. And it's this paradox where they're using a lot of advanced technology, but they're very conservative about new technology. So we did get our foot in the door somewhere, but the product wasn't quite ready. Happens to be a difficult place to implement, to get adoption of new technology. That's all I was going to say.
May I suggest you look at a group out of Stanford called Codex, and they have all of the new legal tech companies demoing their systems there. So if you were able to do an afternoon presentation for that group, that would let the entire legal world that's open to adopting radical new technologies know about your existence.
Well, let me say this, and not to take up too much more time here, but in terms of, I've been at this a long time, and I'm way past the point of, oh, I'm going to get rich or anything like that. It's a higher purpose. And I see my friend Pascal, who's a very successful entrepreneur, said, David, where you start first could have big implications for where you end up. And that would apply also, Frode, to what you're doing with your product. And so my deepest interest is in transdisciplinary research focused on sustainability, public health, and other things like that. And I actually know some people that are leaders in the science of team science, and they've said highlighter is needed for the Open Science Initiative, which is making all of the research that's government funded available to everyone, not at a cost. And also for transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary teams, which have, you know, they have high aspirations, but oftentimes just don't get it done because of the obstacles. And then education itself, which is what brought me into this instructional design learning sciences to begin with, because I feel that our current system is really out of whack with current reality and needs a lot of work. So that's, I think, even though they're, you know, as like IOPERA would be an amazing fit, and law firms, and they're all deep pockets. My goal is to stick with things that I can put my heart into, and the Future Text Project is one of those things. I feel, you know, it's an important, you know, I think what Frode and all of the people that have been with him this past decade have really done, you know, something really worthwhile and amazing. And it would be fun to see, okay, where can this go next? It might bear some real worthwhile fruit or not, because there's, you know, 1,000 things that we could be doing. So it's a question of deciding, you know, where does goodness lie, as someone used to say.
I just wanted to thank everybody for allowing me a lot of extra Zoom time this particular day. And I appreciate, David, your being here and having this conversation with us really interesting and important things you're dealing with.
Thanks, Bob. That means a lot to me.
Wonderful
so much.
work. Yeah, no, Peter, if it was you, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just saying, thanks so much for the demo.
You do bring up some things there, guys. First of all, very early on, there's the notion of why should we have to read all this stuff? You know, I do feel a bit like for the 3 volumes of the books we've made, it is, to use Mark's language, is a bit like shoveling into a bucket. You know, it's like 2 million words, 2 million characters or something we have now. And yes, for future systems, I'm sure it'll be worthwhile, but to make it useful now, we have to provide different view specs, and the view specs should come from this type of thing. I hope, David, that you will get a really wonderful release of the product. I hope we can also have some means, because I completely understand your business situation. I'm in the same situation, but we can develop some ways where we can move things about. Because even in the community right here, you know, I would really like to subscribe to some of the people here's highlights for specific kinds of documents, depending on the tags. I'd love to see different views. I'd love to be able to have it in 2D and also in, of course, in VR. So how do we develop that without just giving up on our businesses? It's an absolute important question to deal with. But
Well, let me just say, Frode, I'm willing to invest time and effort with other people into going through the collection. And one thought I had, and you can tell me if you think this is impractical, is you would just write back to all of the authors and say, you know, they could use some simple markup tool, even in Adobe or Word, highlight all the important parts of, you know, what are the most important 10% of your essay with comments, and let them do that, right? And then we bring all that into Highlighter and we have a running head start. That would be one thought. The other is we could look for funding. I mean, that's a long, you know, that's a 8-10 month project between writing something and so forth. But I've already got a couple of proposals in the works, so it wouldn't take that much to get a narrative written around, you know, because this is pretty interesting, right? You assembled all these brand name people and now, you know, propose a project that would demonstrate, you know, the future of text itself by writing about it and using future-oriented technology. So that could be another way to proceed. But I'm either way, I'm available. And I guess when we have a viable alpha release or maybe beta, so sometime within the next 3 months, I'll check back with the group. So you can, and then make the product available so people could play with it and then maybe make a decision at that point.
Yeah, I mean, we would like to see what you have done, of course, in the environment, to read your edit, so to speak, your highlight, your high trail. That would definitely be worthwhile.
So I'm a fifth of the way through the new high trail, because the 365 page one, Bob's right. It's not a really coherent storyline. It's more just the there is a main trail, but it meanders all over the place. The next one I'll do will be much more coherent and to the point, and directed at answering Bob's questions. And so once
and has a table of contents, please.
And a table of contents, right?
It's contents, not authors. It's contents.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What's in what, and we maybe go from there, because that would be a good starting point. You know, let's see what, and I'll go back, Bob, and look for things like what are the challenges, what are the gaps with that people have brought up.
And send it to me before you go to bed tonight.
Yeah, right. I'll have it done. Yeah. Well, you know, yeah.
Sounds perfect. And please remember, no meeting next Monday because I'm going to Paris to see Fabienne for Valentine. Or thereabouts. All right. Take care, everyone. See you
Okay,
in
everyone.
2 weeks. Bye.
Have a good week.